Hi there, and welcome back after a hopefully very nice Easter holiday for all of you out there. So, you're probably all here because you're very curious to understand what does chestnuts have to do with innovation forecasts. I can tell you that I'm curious to know that, and we are gonna have some nice experiments throughout this tidbit. So, welcome to Spicy Tidbits, where we will have the latest, hottest research results served right for your lunch. It's a collaboration between Maritime Research Alliance and Marlock, and every Wednesday at 12 o'clock for half an hour, we're gonna serve you these hot and spicy research results. So, what is a tidbit? Because many of you at the participant list have not attended before. I'll just make it very short because tidbits is a very, very cozy and funny concept. That's why you see that Matthew and myself, we have no blurred up or logo backgrounds. We are just directly transmitting from our homes. It's also, it's because a tidbit, it's a little bit of a TED Talk. That's the short format, and then of a talk show, that's the cozy background. And it's only 15 minutes of a presentation followed by a 15-minute Q&A, and that's where you come into the tidbit, because you can write all your questions in the chat, and then afterwards Matt and I, we will discuss your questions, and then please have your lunch. This is an encouragement to remember to eat something throughout the day, because we're all very busy doing all these Zoom meetings all day long. So do remember to make yourself a nice sandwich and enjoy this wonderful snacky tidbit with Matthew Spaniol from Aarhus University. He's a postdoc and he's really, really cool. So welcome, Matthew, here from Henriette Dybkjær Marlock in the Copenhagen Østerbro studio, directly to you, Matthew, in the, where is your studio located?
I am in Aarhus.
In Aarhus, so it's all around Denmark today. The stage is yours, Matthew. I'm gonna lean back and say cheers.
Cheers. Thanks, Henrietta. Hi, everybody. Screen is sharing, looking good? Fantastic. Great, thanks for that introduction. My name is Matthew Spaniol. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow at Aarhus University. And I'm going to be talking today about the future of ocean economies. These are interim results that we've generated from an Interreg project from the North Sea region called Periscope, right? And so a little bit about myself. Before that, I was a PhD student, did an industrial PhD together with Danske Maritime, and I specialize in strategic foresight and the sociology of science and technology, and have been working in and around maritime and the ocean economies for about the last 10 years. Quick word on strategic foresight. It can be conceptualized as a toolbox for consultancy and think tank tools, right? So everything from forecasting to scenario planning to trend auditing. Pointer options, laser pointer. Today we're going to be talking about a Foresight Radar here that we've built inside of Periscope. And I'm really happy to be able to share this with everybody today. A little bit about what we're doing in this talk and in Periscope. A lot of people are probably familiar with the technology diffusion curve, right? The idea that technologies, as they move throughout customers and markets, right? You've got, say, early innovators and adopters, right? And then it reaches some kind of say critical mass after you get through this early majority, and then you get to this late majority and these laggards, right? So as technology moves throughout society, these S-curves are able to explain a lot about what is happening as technology diffuses through societies. What are we interested in here? We're interested in this moment of what we call accepted practice, right? So in the technology diffusion curve, right, there's a moment when an innovation actually is made real, right? The idea that there's an N equals 1, that there's one customer that has now adopted this technology, and now this innovation is then ready to spread, it's ready to scale, right? So this is the moment that we're trying to forecast, right? And before that, right, from time zero or now until that innovation is actually realized in the market, you've got what is called the commercialization valley of death, right? So this is this time gap between an idea's conception or an innovation's conception and its actual uptake, beginning of its uptake in the market. Right? And that's what we're doing. We're talking about the time to commercial availability. There's a couple other different names for it, right? But there's time when you could possibly buy this technology or this innovation off the shelf. But what does this have to do with chestnuts? I brought my chestnuts here today with me. You see, I got a big vase of them. And we can actually use chestnuts as a way to think about how we can produce forecasts, right? So if I asked you to make a guess, how many chestnuts do you think are inside this vase, right? We've got some that are quite big, right? And we've got some that are a little bit smaller, right? But if you had to wager a guess, how many chestnuts do you think are in here? Now, once everybody has guessed, right? Maybe you've seen this experiment as known as the jelly bean experiment, another delicious food item, right? But this is an example of what we're trying to get at with a notion called the wisdom of the crowds, right? The idea that information about the world and the way that the world works, right, is disseminated in all of our heads, right? It's distributed across large populations of people, right? So by asking people to guess how many chestnuts are in here, right, you may or may not get the right answer from any individual. However, the aggregated answer, what we would call the central tendency information, the median, the mean, and the standard deviation, the descriptive statistics of those guesses, right, will actually be a more reliable output than any individual's guess. And how would we know whose guess to take in the first place, right, if everybody's guessing of when something's going to happen, right? So we're asking a lot of people and respondents a lot of different questions about when technology is going to turn into this innovation, right, and meet this market need. The paradox here is that you cannot ask people in a forum to do this activity, right? So each guess has to be independent of one another. So if somebody wrote in the chat bubble real quick a number, right, everybody would automatically be anchored to that number. So these answers actually have to be, say, come to independently. And so in Periscope, in our project, we asked a whole bunch of people to predict on a whole bunch of different innovation opportunities, right, inside of the maritime and ocean economies. And it sounded like this. It's not so much of a question, but more like a prompt. So please estimate how many years from now that accomplishing task A with or by technology B will become an accepted practice, right? Or it will become commercially available, right? Now, there's a subtle but important difference here, right? And I take you to the example of foldable containers. Right, foldable containers have been commercially available now for quite some time. However, as a practice, it has not yet been accepted. So it's very important for us to know what the status is, right, of these different innovation opportunities and what they're acting on. Right, and the third one that we would say that this innovation opportunity is a viable alternative to something else, right? Then you're actually comparing technology B against technology C and asking when this technology C then would be, say, more profitable or there's more of a business case for it than the other ones. So how did we get our answers? So respondents' estimations and opinions, right? They were given a sliding scale, right? From 2020, so these were all collected in November of 2020 and out to 2050. So respondents could put their cursor anywhere they wanted on this scale and basically drop it, right? 2035 being in the perfect middle on this one, right? There's a reason that we bounded this, and I'll get back to that later. Respondents, however, also had the opportunity to say it's never going to happen. It's kind of like saying, well, there's no chestnuts in the vase. But the idea is that you're making a categorical distinction between plausibility and possibility. So you're saying it's not going to happen because it's impossible because something else is going to happen before that, for example. Now, respondents also had the opportunity to answer it's already here, right? And that's a very critical piece of information for us, because if we're missing something or somebody knows something, because that information that's distributed in everybody's heads, it's not the same, right? So insider information is very key to this process as well, to help us understand what the status of these innovation opportunities are. And so inside of Periscope, right, we started by looking and we found about 325 different opportunities, right, for maritime and ocean economies, right? And I have to say a big shout out and a thanks to all my student assistants for helping us find all those. And we took all those, right, and we found and wrote up 115 of them, right, to be able to put on side of this Periscope Foresight Radar, which we'll get to in a second. And I also have to say thank you to our friends from EcoProdigy for the collaboration that we had between these two projects. That's a Baltic Sea project, we're a North Sea project, but we were covering a lot of innovation concepts and covering a lot of common ground. So we did quite a bit of sharing in those two projects, and it was very, very, very fruitful. Right. So we've got all of these innovation concepts. So what are we going to do with them then? So I'm going to share another screen that we've got here. So this is the Foresight Radar that we've developed. I'm assuming you can see it now. I can't see that the border is showing, but I would hope that you can see this. Let me just make sure. Is it on? Perfect. So we've got some different segments, you could call them. You could call them locations. So we found a bunch of opportunities inside of ports and terminals and shipyards, and there's a lot here because that's where our friends in EcoProdigy really lended us a hand to get through those. We've got a bunch in maritime then, in maritime transport, we've got offshore wind, and we've got ocean infrastructure. So we zoom all the way in and we can see that on the axis here, we've got years, right? 2021, right, being that first circle, 2025, 2020, 2030, and out to 2035, right? So I'm going to talk about a few of these that we came up with, some of the ones that are a bit more fun and provocative, but this is our then radar then that links out then to the real world with our 115 opportunities on it. So back to my slide share here. Okay. Boom. Where's that? Okay. All right, our Maritime and Offshore Foresight Radar is up and running. All right, first example, 3D printing of wind turbine blades offshore and on-site at parks. Between 2020 and 2030, it has been forecasted that approximately 4,091 offshore turbines will be installed throughout all of Europe. Counting the modern standard of 3 blades each, we can anticipate that over 12,000 turbine blades are needed. Transport of blades can amount up to 20% of development costs. So the prompt question, when will it become accepted practice that turbine blades will be 3D printed offshore at the sites of wind park development projects? So we've got something of what we call a violin plot that shows the distribution of the predictions down here, right, and a data table. Our mean guess for this opportunity is then 2031, which means that half the guesses are above 2031 and half the guesses are below 2031, right? The most popular guess was 2035 for this one, which also, if you think about this, if you're familiar with box and whisker plots, this is also then shows the distribution of how that works, right? With these dotted lines showing 25% of the answers are here, 25% of the answers are here, and so forth. But the median then being here. With then a mean, so the average guess, right, which is going to be weighted and pull that guess out into the future because it's an average. So, right, imagine if somebody walked in the room and said there's 1 million chestnuts in the jar. Well, that would kind of skew all those answers out to the right, and it would make that average, right? So we rely pretty much on the median for a lot of these, but a standard deviation gives us an indication of then how skewed that goes out to one side based on that mean. 0% of the people said that this is already here, and 10% of the people said that this is never going to happen. Now at Periscope, we did a deep dive into this one, right? So we've got, I'll be sure to send this link around to a 2.5-hour webinar that our partners from the UK did on the 3D printing of wind turbine blades, right? Shooting for that target horizon of 2031. Here's another one for you. How about offshore wind kite farms? Right, the idea that you can put a generator on top of the water and these kites then can fly about 800 meters in the air where the wind is much more constant and much stronger. When will we see offshore wind kite farms happening? We've got a median, right, guess of 2035. Right, and we've got a mode then, which is the most popular guess as well, being at 2035, and we've got a mean then at 2035 as well. 3% think that this is already here, that they're being put offshore, and 14% that they think that these are never going to happen. Here's something of a crowd favorite. How about multi-purpose drones on ships? Now, if you compare this violin plot here at the bottom to the previous one, you can see that this one seems to kind of bulk around this 2035 and then spread out from the sides. This one, however, really looks like it's on our doorstep. In fact, there are projects and prototypes out there, right? Are they commercially available? That's a question to be answered, but they're almost here, right? This multi-purpose drone, right, is primarily discussing for use in navigation, especially when vessels are getting close to the quay, right? To make sure if there's foggy conditions, for example, in China, can we measure how far we are away, right? 2025 being the median in the mode again, but look at these answers, right? They're clustering around something a little bit earlier than that. 4% think that they're never going to happen, and 4% think that they're already here. How about autonomous containers, right? The idea that you could drop a container off at sea and that container can navigate its way to a beach and then drive up a beach and go to, say, Netto or its final destination, right? We've got a median date here of 2033 and a mode of 2030. However, look at this never going to happen over here. 32% of respondents think that containers moving around autonomously is something that's not going to happen, right? What about renewable methanol, right? A recent topic in Tidbits, right? Renewable methanol to power ocean-going vessels, right? We know that there's renewable empowered X happening for short sea and also for ferries, and those ships are currently almost, if they're not under construction, right, they're almost here. But what about long distance ocean going vessels, right? Median date here, 2031 with a mode of 2030, right? And we see that we've got clusters of answers, 2025, 2030, 2035, 2040, 2045. We're calling this pattern that we're finding the tyranny of the 5-year window, that as we estimate things and we're uncertain about their implications and when they're going to happen, we tend to think in 5-year increments. However, we're able to tease out a little bit more information in a graph like this if we're able to say something like 2031. Here's one where 75% of the people think this one's going to happen in 2025. The idea, another previous talk on Tidbits, right? That contracts are in play to incentivize the minimum time at port, that we're giving the port an actual incentive to move those ships through, requiring that the ports almost coordinate with one another to tell and share information on loading and discharging, right? 75% of the people think that this is going to happen in 2025, right? Here's another quite provocative one, the second most provocative one that we have inside the Periscope radar, with a 27% chance that this will never happen, or 27% of respondents thinking that this is never going to happen, with a median at 2028. Game controllers for steering vessels. The idea that pilots in ports can take over the navigation of a vessel as that vessel gets close using a game controller. Right, there are instances of this happening already in the U.S. Navy, but again, it seems like this is rather inconclusive when you get some kind of spread like this inside of the violin plots for prediction like this. Now, knowing that we have the transportation cluster also involved today, I put in a fun one about a cargo hyperloop. So the cargo hyperloop, the idea that Elon Musk's Boring company can dig a tunnel perhaps, and we can use electromagnetic, say, force to push these containers at very high speeds, right, from a point A to a point B, right? The cargo hyperloop, we've got a median date of 2040, right, with a mode at 2050. So most of the respondents are saying that this is going to happen at the year 2050, but they didn't necessarily go the extra step to say that this is never going to happen. Okay. So that's a handful of them, right? We've got 115 of these ideas inside of the Periscope opportunity portfolio. What's kind of cool about when you have these forecasts, the ones that are with the information that we're able to get out of them, is that all of a sudden it makes planning a little bit more tangible. So we've got a deadline for ourselves. We can use this one, or we can decide internally if this is the right date or the wrong date, but at least it's a starting point for discussion. And I'll explain why that's important in a second. Back to our radar, right? Major themes, right? Maritime ports, shipyards, offshore wind, and other infrastructure. However, you can also cut those 115 opportunities in a lot of different ways, right? You could talk about a cluster of them talking about autonomous systems and digitalization, right? Another one, a bunch of them are about drones and robotic applications in maritime and offshore. Construction, maintenance, and repair and decommissioning, right? Multi-use platforms and process optimization, ocean energy, and we even have a bunch on policy standards and regulations, probably about a dozen of them. Now, a few words of caution before I conclude, right? This is not the end. This is but a beginning, right? So that's great. You're predicting all of these opportunities, but guess what? These opportunities aren't going to make themselves happen, right? Innovation doesn't happen without us, without people and groups coming together, deciding that this is something that we want to chase after together and moving forward together. And again, these forecasts are all susceptible from updated information. So as new information comes to the fore, right, these change. So it's a dynamic idea of a radar, something that would have to be reproduced periodically then to assess how far in the future. Maybe some of them come faster, maybe some of them stay out on the edge of that radar forever. Second thing, another word of caution is just because many believe it to be true, it does not make it so. So this is called the consensus fallacy. The idea that just because many people think that it's going to happen, imagining it doesn't actually make it happen, right? And many of these will probably even be disrupted before they're even born, right? And the third thing that I would say is that innovators and organizers need to preserve optionality. What does that mean? That means that innovation is not an end in itself, that innovations improve the way things are done and the way things happen. And many innovative organizations pivot to other markets and industry when there's a better fit. What does that mean? That means even though we may be chasing an opportunity inside of a specific industrial context, such as maritime and offshore, we would see applications for that perhaps elsewhere. And if those elsewhere applications provide a better business case, we may pivot. Right? And that's the same thing that's happening in other industries. As technologies mature in other industries and they see an opportunity in maritime and offshore, there's a chance that they may pivot and come into maritime and offshore. And finally, again, these don't happen by themselves, right? So Periscope is really in the interest of finding ways to bring people together, coalitions, behind each of these ideas and all of these ideas. They're all potential projects, right? Whether or not they're projects worth pursuing is an individual choice, right? So one person's opportunity, it may not be, they might recognize it as being a viable opportunity for somebody, but in order to make that a viable opportunity for themselves, they need to be able to visualize themselves inside of that, and only then would they pursue it. So we're trying to find ways to bring the North Sea region's ecosystem of industrial actors together behind ideas, and using those ideas then as a organizing point from which we can say build technology roadmaps, right, and innovation roadmaps, and plan how are we going to make this happen? What are the necessary investments that are required to unlock these different opportunities? And that, in a sense, is what we're up to. That's been our mission inside of this Periscope project, to establish something of a permanent foresight platform for blue growth, to catalyze innovation action through an open entrepreneurial discovery process, right? And to facilitate trans-regional and industrial development projects. And with that, my time is up, and I would like to say thank you for listening, and hope you enjoy your chestnuts.
I'm coming back here. Yep, we're back. Thank you, Matt. It was really awesome. This is something that really is useful for every kind, wherever you are working. I mean, it's not only a tool that you can use in the maritime, but great it has been done, and I like the small figures. It's very visually understandable, even for a person like me who is not a researcher. So we also have a lot of questions, so I can see that the people, they really caught your good points of interest here. So I will just jump right into the questions. And yeah, Peter Karlshøj, he's asking, very interesting, who and how many participated in this pool? That's a very easy one, so you should be able to answer that one.
We've had over 1,500 predictions, right, on these. At least, well, hold on. So you got to divide them. You got to divide them between Periscope and EcoProdigy, right? So in the EcoProdigy, we had 40 respondents making probably close to 900 predictions or something like that. In Periscope, we had 1,500 predictions by about 300 people. Something like that. That's my last I checked, right? But they're still open, and that's kind of a problem because we're still collecting more answers. So I mean, they're interim results, but at some point we kind of have to kind of cut it, right? And how do we cut it? And how do we? So we're still wrestling with a after project business model, as you may say. How does this live on and stuff like that? And how do we keep incorporating new voices and new ideas and new people that want to be involved? But yeah, great question.
So if we want to join this little poll, can we write to you then?
In fact, let me see if I've got a link here for you. So
I mean,
this,
who would like to influence the future?
Right. So this link I'm popping into the chat bubble, right? That's where you'll find at least Periscope's ideation portfolio, and you can scroll through that all the way down, right? That's where you'll find a bunch of them. But yeah.
And I've got a couple of more questions written, not in the chat, but to you and me. So that's why you can't see it out there. We have Tiago Fonseca asking, how were the participants recruited? And hold on a second. Thomas Olsen, he says, hi Matt, how did you identify the innovations that the participant could vote on? And who were the participants voting? How were they selected? So it's kind of similar question.
So I'll take Thomas's question first. So how do we source these ideas? There's techniques in future studies. One is known as horizon scanning, right? The idea that you take this kind of broad approach to understanding the developments of change. And there's lots of different ways we applied this to come up with our opportunities, some kinds of trend impact analysis and cross impact analysis. We would also go to many conferences and talk with many people, right? And basically beg, borrow, and steal. Now, the best innovations and the best opportunity ideas, you can't imagine that we're going to be able to get access to those as an independent research unit, right? So what we probably have a lot more of inside of this portfolio is what ends up in the wastebasket, right? So the ideas and the opportunities that people say, that's a great idea. Unfortunately, my organization is not interested in it anymore, and they've passed on it. So here, Matt, you can have it, right? So begging, borrowing, and stealing. Okay, a little less on the stealing, right? But begging and borrowing for ideas. News articles, and then asking and applying a little bit of thought experiment to it. He says, well, what's the status of that in, say, 10 years or 15 years, right? Where's this going? And that was done through a lot of interviews. So that's an interesting development. How do you see that impacting maritime and offshore, over the course of the future? So that's how we kind of came up with those ideas. And then the selection process is a bit more tricky because it has to conform to that question. So the whole, when will it become accepted practice that technology X is used for task Y, or however I phrased it, right? If you can't get it to fit inside that question, you can't forecast it. So they had to be forecastable. So there are a few that are kind of in the gray zone on their forecasting capability. Like the problem we have with foldable containers, still made it into the portfolio right, but there's better ones now that you would say, okay, if it takes a machine at a port to fold these containers, then when are they going to be light enough to be able to fold just by the human hand, right? And if you can do that and they're composite materials, when are they fireproof? So there's a lot of, say, additional considerations that need to be taken into account, right, to figure out what's that next step, or where is it all going, right, if you're able to do those kinds of things.
And the insurance and a lot of other things. So I actually didn't see these foldable containers anywhere. Have they ever been brought into practice?
If you Google foldable container, you'll find 7 million hits on Google or something crazy like that. Okay, and then you do the image search, right? And I flashed that picture of that image search that I did in my PowerPoint presentation, and so you could see that, okay, there are. I mean, just in that screen, there's a dozen companies and concepts and patents that are out there on foldable containers, but where are they? I mean, maybe you guys know better than I do, but that's the thing with distributed information. Part of the issue with something like Periscope and what we've been doing here is that we reach very broadly to collect as many we played a quantity game, not a quality game. So it's up to the individuals to go in and read our descriptions, for example, on that website that we put out there, because they all have descriptions that are about 200 words long, where we try to say, this is what we're doing. This is the current state of play, right? This is the technology we're proposing, right? Here's a forecast of the market that we're addressing with this innovation, right? And then here are some of the obvious barriers. So we try to write it in an objective way, but of course that's pretty much impossible because everybody's got these kind of hints at biases. But that's why it took our team, it took a team effort from my students and myself, right? And to run these by experts and people who have been in the industry a long time to get their take on them, right? And we would rewrite them, right? So again, they're certainly a good place to start, but they're probably not good advice on a place to end because we went so broad.
So if I click on the web page, the Periscope Network.eu, is that I can find a complete list of all the different trends you have been working with?
You'll find periscopes in there. I'll send another, I can send it now, or I could dig it up now and send it, but you'll also see that EcoProdigy has also published a couple of reports, one on the future of shipbuilding, and that's got 22 different ideas in that one. And then one on the future of integrated ship logistics, very much looking at ro-ro shipping, where we've got an isolated set in there. So between those two roadmaps, right, we pulled those, we shared a lot and we went back and forth and we built the Periscope Radar, right, heavily on the backs of EcoProdigy and vice versa, right?
You know what we do? We always send out a thank you for attending email to everyone who was joining this tidbit. And I will put the links in there. If you send them to me, I will put the links in the thank you for attending. And that's also where we'll put the link for the recording of this webinar. So you can have it, all things together. And I think perhaps also we will do a little LinkedIn post because why not tell the world about it? I love it. I mean, who don't need to know a little bit about what's going on in the future?
Right.
Lot over time, but I will you can just drop out as you have other meetings out there. But I have another question for you, Matt, if it's okay. That is a question from Nana Hemmingsen, who asks, how about the future of fuels for shipping?
That's a tough nut to crack. That's a big one, because when we were looking into that, we realized that it's not just a fuel that's going to make that happen, but you got to bring the whole value network with it, right? So it's fine that you could power a vessel, right, by renewable fuels or powered X fuels. But what about all the bunkering? What about the production, right? What about the waste? And so it becomes a little bit tricky because there's a lot of baggage that comes with those kinds of questions. There are a handful on ocean energy and hydrogen inside of the portfolio, and things about like energy hubs offshore, right? And there's a lot going on there. And one of the things that we will be doing at Aarhus is be taking a little bit of a deeper dive into these renewable fuels, right? So that's one of the things that we'll stop and really take a good look at. So we'll be, if you're interested in joining workshops, we'll be hosting them probably at Aarhus University in the near future, where we'll be using some of these forecasts then to build the technology roadmaps, right, with multiple stakeholders at the table in order to figure out what's it going to take, right, to get there, right? It's a hot topic, and we're going to ride that wave, yeah.
I can also recommend to watch the tidbit with Anders Iversen from DTU, who had done a couple of tests putting 3 different fuels into an engine at DTU. So that was like very practical way of looking at, is it really possible to put ammonia into the engine, and what's all the challenges? And so he did with a couple of other fuels. So very, very concrete tidbit, that one, with a lot of pictures and films and so on. So I mean, I totally agree with you. It's such a huge value chain you should consider for the new fuels. So, well, what do you say? When will we have new fuels? When do you think we could? let's have a short a little forecast here from you. What do you think?
They're already here. I mean, we have the capability to produce them, right? It's the scaling that's the problem right now. That's the bottleneck, right? And the rest of the supply chain to come along with it, right? So it's not impossible to make them, you know, but when are they going to become a viable alternative, right, to the status quo? That's the question, right? That one has to answer.
What I heard is that we'll have multiple fuels in the future, not like now where all ships are doing heavy fuel. So it will be a multiple fuel scenario in the future. That is what I hear from here and there and everywhere. So that will also have some challenges, because then ships are specialized in one thing, and all the crew and insurance, and that's going to be awesome. Let's see what will happen with that. But that will be another tidbit talking about that, because now I think it has come to an end, and also you, Matthew, and I, we will grab a lunch. So I will just say, if you liked Matthew's tidbit today, we have organized a tidbit with Matthew on May 27th. And there he will take a deep dive into the technologies of drones and robots for the maritime. Well, drones are also robots, so just to make you understand that that's what it's about. So that will be a focus, especially for that part of the forecasting in the Periscope project. So if you're curious about that, sign up for that one. It's going to be awesome too, I think. So that said, I will be back in the Tidbit studio tomorrow, where we will have a Center for Cybersecurity in the studio, and he's going to tell us a little bit about how to control your suppliers in regards to your cybersecurity in your company. And I think that's something useful for all of us to know a little bit about the vendors and suppliers who sometimes are in our systems in one way or another. So that's tomorrow, 12 o'clock. And then we will have another awesome part with the knowledge from our research partners next week. So stay tuned and sign up for the invitations. Thank you so much for attending, and a warm thank you to you, Matt, for sharing your knowledge with us. Have a nice day out there. Bye-bye.